The lecture hall buzzed with the hum of over a dozen alien languages, each competing for dominance. Mira Ellison stepped through the doorway, her boots clicking against the sleek, polished floor. She felt every eye turned to her as if she were some exotic specimen instead of a human cadet. She adjusted her plain academy uniform and kept her head down, her gaze scanning for an empty seat. Another human, a guttural voice rumbled from across the room. Mira didn't look up, but the sneer was audible in the tone. They send their weakest to our academy now? Pathetic. The voice belonged to Zyther, a towering Kraglin with deep red scales and a broad, sneering face. Kraglins were notorious across the galaxy for their physical strength, but Mira had seen his kind before, and far worse. Her instinct was to ignore him, to let the comments roll off like they always did. After all, blending in was part of her plan. Stay under the radar, get her qualifications, and move on. But Zyther wasn't letting up. Hey, human, he called again, louder this time. Do you need me to explain what a tactical course is? Or maybe your tiny brain can't comprehend anything beyond swinging a club. The room erupted in laughter, an uncomfortable mix of alien growls, whistles, and chirps. Myra's fingers tightened around the strap of her bag, but she forced herself to remain calm. I asked you a question, Zyther pressed, his massive bulk shifting in his seat. Or is your kind too primitive to answer? Mira finally looked up, her green eyes locking onto his slitted yellow ones. The room fell quiet as the tension crackled like an exposed wire. I understand the course just fine, Mira said, her voice steady. But thanks for your concern. Zyther smirked, revealing sharp, jagged teeth. Concern? Oh, no, I'm just making sure you don't embarrass yourself. The Galactic Coalition Academy isn't for amateurs. Then why are you here? She shot back without missing a beat. A few of the students laughed, and Zyther's smirk vanished. Myra's heart pounded, but she held his gaze, refusing to flinch. Before he could respond, the instructor, a wiry Dorokian with iridescent blue skin, entered the room and clapped his hands for attention. Quiet down. Today's lesson is on adaptive tactical strategy. Open your holotexts to Chapter 3. Mira exhaled softly and took a seat near the back, the heat of Zyther's glare burning into her. She knew she'd painted a target on her back, but it was nothing new. She'd dealt with bullies like him before, and she'd deal with him again if necessary. As the lesson progressed, Mira remained focused, taking detailed notes while the instructor explained various battle scenarios. Meanwhile, Zyther's comments continued, whispered loud enough for the students around him to hear. When the class ended, Mira gathered her things quickly, eager to leave before Zyther could try anything else. But as she stood, she heard his voice again, louder this time. Why don't we settle this in the simulation room, human, he said, standing to his full, imposing height. Let's see if you can actually back up that attitude. The room went silent again, all eyes darting between Mira and Zyther. She met his challenge with a cool expression, though her mind raced. She hadn't come here to make waves, but avoiding this fight now would make things worse. Fine, Mira said, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. I'll meet you there. A ripple of murmurs spread through the room as she walked out, her steps measured and steady. She hadn't wanted to draw attention, but now it was unavoidable. One way or another, Zyther was about to learn exactly who he was dealing with. The simulation chamber loomed like a coliseum, its curved walls lined with observation decks that quickly filled with curious cadets. Word of the humans' challenge had spread through the academy like wildfire. Mira Ellison stood in the center of the arena, her expression calm, betraying none of the turmoil beneath. Zyther stomped in moments later, his crimson scales gleaming under the harsh overhead lights. His claws clicked against the floor as he turned to the crowd, basking in their cheers. Remember this moment, he growled, pointing a clawed finger at Mira. The day humanity learns its place. Mira resisted the urge to roll her eyes. She had fought beings twice Zyther's size and strength before, but the real fight wasn't with him. It was with herself, to remain composed, to not let years of battlefield instincts take over. She'd promised herself this was a fresh start. The instructor's voice crackled over the intercom. This simulation will test tactical decision-making, resource management, and combat strategy. Each participant will lead a simulated force in a planetary invasion scenario. The goal: secure the enemy's stronghold while defending your own. Are the combatants ready? Zyther grinned, baring his jagged teeth. Ready to send her running. Mira didn't rise to the bait. Ready. The countdown began, and Myra's tactical interface materialized before her, a glowing blue map displaying terrain, troop placements, and resource points. The simulation generated armies tailored to the participant species, meaning Mira commanded a human fleet, fast, versatile, and reliant on precision. Zyther's Kraglin forces were the opposite: brute strength, overwhelming numbers, and heavy artillery. As the simulation began, Zyther launched an immediate offensive. His forces surged across the virtual battlefield, a wave of tanks and infantry crashing toward Myra's forward defenses. The crowd cheered as his assault demolished her outermost line of drones. Mira remained calm, her fingers gliding over the controls. She let him take the bait, retreating strategically while redirecting her resources. Her mind worked like a machine, calculating probabilities and predicting his next moves. This wasn't just a duel, it was a test of patience and adaptability, two things Zyther clearly lacked. You're already losing, human. Zyther roared, his forces closing in on what appeared to be her central base. But Mira was several steps ahead. The first strike hit Zyther's flank, a surgical airstrike that obliterated his artillery. Before he could react, her stealth units infiltrated his supply lines, cutting off reinforcements. His forces, overextended and vulnerable, crumbled under the coordinated assault. The crowd gasped as Myra's holographic army closed in on Zyther's stronghold, surrounding it with a precision that bordered on artistry. Impossible! Zyther growled, slamming his fists on the controls. He tried to rally his remaining troops, but it was too late. Myra's forces overwhelmed his defenses, ending the simulation with a decisive victory. The chamber fell silent as the results displayed overhead. Victory, Cadet Mira Ellison. Zyther stared at the screen in disbelief, his confidence shattered. Mira stepped forward, her voice calm but carrying an edge. War isn't about brute strength, she said, her eyes locking onto his. It's about knowing your enemy, and yourself. As the crowd erupted in cheers and murmurs, Mira walked out of the chamber, her expression unreadable. She hadn't come here to prove herself, but it seemed fate had other plans. The academy halls were abuzz with the fallout from the duel. Mira Ellison, the quiet human cadet everyone had dismissed as unremarkable, had obliterated Zyther, one of the academy's loudest and most intimidating students. Whispers followed her wherever she went, though she pretended not to notice. How did she do it? She made it look easy. Maybe the humans aren't as weak as we thought. Mira kept her expression neutral as she made her way to the cafeteria, ignoring the stares and hushed voices. She'd wanted to avoid attention, but now it seemed impossible. Her performance had painted a target on her back, one she had hoped to leave behind when she enlisted at the Galactic Coalition Academy. As she sat down with her tray, her mind drifted to memories she'd worked hard to bury. The screech of alarms echoed through the steel corridors of the TDS Resolute. Mira, then Lieutenant Commander Ellison, barked orders as enemy Cordith ships bore down on them. Their shields were failing, and casualties were mounting. The Cordith were relentless, their hive mind strategies overwhelming most fleets. But Mira wasn't most commanders. Redirect all power to the forward cannons, she ordered, her voice steady amidst the chaos. But Commander, that'll leave us defenseless, protested one of her officers. Exactly. They'll think we're vulnerable. When they close in, we'll detonate the auxiliary reactors. They'll never see it coming. It was a gamble, but it worked. The explosion decimated the Cordith fleet, turning the tide of battle. Myra's crew hailed her as a hero that day, but the victory came at a cost she carried in the form of scars both seen and unseen. A tray clattered onto the table, snapping Mira out of her reverie. Zyther loomed over her, his scaled face a mask of barely concealed rage. You humiliated me, he growled, his voice low enough not to draw attention, but his tone brimming with menace. I want answers. How did a human defeat me? Mira met his gaze with icy calm. You underestimated me. That's on you. His claws dug into the table's edge. Don't play coy. No human has reflexes like that, strategy like that. Who are you? Before Mira could respond, a shadow fell over them. It was Instructor Lorik, the Dorokian who had overseen their simulation. His glowing blue eyes flicked between them. Cadet Zyther, your behavior is unbecoming of a future officer. Leave now. Zyther hesitated, his claws flexing, but Lorik's piercing gaze left no room for argument. With a snarl, he stormed off, leaving Mira and Lorik alone. The instructor sat across from her, his expression unreadable. You're not just a cadet, are you? Mira's jaw tightened. I'm here to learn. That's all. Lorik tilted his head. The Coalition knows who you are, Mira Ellison. A decorated veteran. A hero of the Cordith Wars. Your record may be classified, but some of us have access. Mira's stomach sank. The last thing she wanted was to be unmasked. Then you know why I'm here, and why I want to stay under the radar. Lorik nodded, his tone softening. Your secret's safe with me, cadet. But be careful. The galaxy has a way of bringing the past back when you least expect it. As Lorik walked away, Mira's appetite vanished. She stared at her untouched meal, the weight of her past pressing heavily on her chest. The quiet life she'd sought was slipping through her fingers, and she wasn't sure if she could stop it. The simulation victory had made Mira Ellison the talk of the Academy. Everywhere she went, cadets whispered behind her back, some in admiration, others in disbelief. Humans, once regarded as a minor species among the Galactic Coalition, now had a champion in their ranks, and it wasn't sitting well with everyone. For Zyther, the defeat was a wound to both his pride and his reputation. Kraglins thrived on dominance, and for a human to best one of their own was an insult to his entire species. He stormed through the academy halls, his claws digging into the walls as cadets quickly stepped aside to avoid his wrath. Mira, meanwhile, found herself called into the administrative wing. She entered the room to find Instructor Lorik waiting with a holographic display active behind him. The words classified dossier flickered in bold, red letters. Sit, Cadet Ellison, Lorik said, gesturing to the chair opposite him. Mira hesitated but complied, her expression guarded. What's this about? Lorik steepled his fingers, his glowing blue eyes studying her intently. Your performance in the simulation has drawn attention. Not just from your peers, but from the Academy's higher echelons. Questions are being asked. Questions I'd rather not answer, Mira said curtly. Lorik's lips twitched into a faint smile. Understandable. But secrets don't stay buried for long, especially in a place like this. He tapped the holographic display, and Mira's military record appeared. Her rank, accolades, and battles were listed in stark detail. The Cordith Wars, the Battle of Rigel Prime, the Siege of Helion 5, each event marked by victories that had cost her more than she cared to admit. Why didn't you tell us who you were? Lorik asked, leaning forward. Because I'm not that person anymore, Mira said firmly. I came here to learn, not to relive my past. Lorik nodded slowly. I understand. But others might not. Zyther, for one, won't let this go. Mira's jaw tightened. Let him try. Meanwhile, Zyther was in the training arena, venting his frustration on a combat dummy. His strikes were ferocious, his roars echoing through the empty chamber. He couldn't erase the image of Mira dismantling his forces, her calm precision making him look like an amateur. It wasn't just about pride anymore, it was about restoring the honor of his species. You seek revenge, a deep voice rumbled from behind him. Zyther turned to see Ambassador Garath, a senior Kraglin official and his distant relative. The ambassador's imposing frame seemed to fill the room, his golden scales shimmering under the lights. I seek justice, Zyther growled. That human, she cheated. Garath snorted. Careful with your accusations, boy. The Coalition monitors these things closely, and your humiliation was public. If you bring further disgrace to our name, the consequences will be severe. Zyther bristled. What am I supposed to do? Let her walk around as if she's better than us? Garath's eyes narrowed. No. You're going to apologize. What? Zyther spat, his voice incredulous. You heard me, Garath said, his tone cold. Challenge her again, and you'll only confirm your inferiority. Apologize, and you might salvage what's left of your dignity. Zyther's claws curled into fists, but he nodded reluctantly. The weight of his family's honor was heavier than his pride. Later that day, the cadets gathered in the main hall for an assembly. Mira stood near the back, her arms crossed, feeling the weight of 1,000 eyes. When Zyther stepped onto the stage, silence fell. He hesitated, his gaze sweeping the room before landing on Mira. His jaw tightened, but he forced the words out. I apologize for my actions. I underestimated Cadet Ellison and insulted her without cause. She is a worthy opponent. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Mira didn't move, her expression unreadable. But inside, she felt a flicker of surprise, and perhaps, grudging respect. As Zyther stepped down, the assembly ended, and the cadets began to disperse. Mira caught his gaze as he passed her, and for a moment, neither spoke. Then, with a slight nod, he walked away. Mira exhaled, the tension in her shoulders easing. The battle wasn't over, not by a long shot, but for now, the storm had quieted. The academy felt different in the days following Zyther's public apology. The sharp-edged stares and whispered doubts Mira Ellison had grown accustomed to seemed to soften, replaced by cautious curiosity. She hadn't sought recognition, but now her name was on every cadet's lips. Some admired her skill. Others saw her as a threat. And a few, like Zyther, were beginning to see her in a new light altogether. Mira sat alone in the simulation chamber, reviewing battle data on her holotablet. She preferred the quiet, a rare commodity in an academy teeming with students from dozens of species. But today, even the solitude felt uneasy. The past she had worked so hard to bury was inching its way to the surface, one victory at a time. A familiar shadow loomed behind her. Without looking up, she spoke. "What do you want, Zyther?" The Kraglin stepped forward, his massive frame blocking the light. His usual arrogance was absent, replaced by a guarded expression Mira hadn't seen before. "I didn't come to fight," he said, his voice surprisingly measured. "I came to talk." Mira finally looked up, raising an eyebrow. "Talk? That's new." Zyther folded his arms, his scaled chest rising and falling as he exhaled heavily. "I owe you more than an apology. What you did in that simulation, it wasn't luck. It wasn't a fluke. I need to know, how." Mira leaned back in her chair, studying him. Gone was the brash, overconfident bully. In his place stood someone willing to listen, to learn. "You're asking for advice," she said, half smiling. "Never thought I'd see the day." Zyther's jaw tightened, but he nodded. The Kraglin way is brute strength, overwhelming force. But in that simulation, none of it mattered. "You made me look small." "It wasn't about making you look small," Mira replied, her tone even. "It was about using your strength against you. Overextension, lack of adaptability, that's where you failed. And it's something you can fix, if you're willing to change how you think." Zyther's yellow eyes narrowed. "Change isn't easy for my kind." "Growth never is," Mira said, standing. She walked to the simulation controls and tapped the display. "But if you're serious, I'll show you." For the next hour, Mira guided Zyther through a series of tactical exercises. At first, his frustration was palpable, his instincts pulling him toward brute force solutions. But gradually, he began to grasp the concepts she explained: patience, precision, and flexibility. The other cadets passing by the chamber stopped to watch, murmuring amongst themselves. Zyther and Mira, two opposites, working together was an unexpected sight. Some scoffed, but others lingered, intrigued by what they saw. By the end of the session, Zyther leaned against the control panel, his breathing heavy but his expression lighter. "You're a better teacher than I expected." Mira smirked. "And you're a better student than I expected. Just don't let it go to your head." A booming laugh escaped him, and for the first time, it wasn't mocking. "Fair enough." Word of their collaboration spread quickly, catching the attention of the Academy's leaders. At the next assembly, the commandant, a stern Varan with glittering, insect-like wings, addressed the cadets. The events of the past week have highlighted the value of unity, the Commandant said. Effective leadership transcends species. To that end, we are initiating a new interspecies training program. Cadet Ellison will serve as its first instructor. The hall erupted in applause. Mira, seated near the back, felt a mix of pride and apprehension. This wasn't what she'd planned, but it was an opportunity, one she couldn't ignore. As she stepped forward to accept the role, her gaze flicked to Zyther. He nodded, a silent acknowledgement of the respect they'd earned for each other. The galaxy might never forget Mira Ellison's name now, but for the first time, she didn't mind. She had found her place, not as a warrior clinging to the past, but as a leader shaping the future.